Welcome, everyone, to Precious Pursuit Radio. I am your host, Jeremy DePanger, and I'm so glad that you guys could join me today. Each episode of our show has a single goal: to discover objective truth with boldness and grace. Before we get started, I wanted to issue my first of two reminders. Yes, I'm limiting myself to two on this. For this episode, that if you find this content interesting, edifying, or otherwise entertaining, please like, share, subscribe, leave a review, or all of the above. So tonight's episode is a live recording, and whenever we go live, you can always join us on YouTube. If you're unable to join live and want to watch or listen after the fact, you can check out new and old episodes on my YouTube channel, Anchor FM, or Spotify, with Apple Podcasts and Google Play coming soon. Just search for Precious Pursuit Radio, and you'll find the latest episode right there at the top. So before we dive into our topic for the night, I just want to make a quick comment about live chat. Live chat is turned on YouTube. So for those of you who are joining us live, feel free to comment as we discuss through the material tonight. As I said in the intro episode, and you may not have seen that, so I'll reiterate it now, that if you have a thought on the topic that we're discussing, feel free to type away in the chat. I'm happy to engage with that, and I hope others engage with it as well. I only have, I guess, kind of one rule and then one kind of format thing. So the rule is everyone needs to be respectful. If there are comments that are not respectful, then we'll deal with that as they come. I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt and assume that people actually want to engage with the topic, that they're serious about it, and that we can all be adults together. The format thing is that just for the sake of the flow of the show, I'm going to get through the content. And if you guys see chat comments building up, don't worry, I see you. I didn't forget about you. I'm going to address them at the end. So what we'll do is we'll go through the content, and then we'll leave a little period at the end to address comments, questions, and kind of do more of a live engagement. That way, those that are only able to listen after the fact will be able to engage with the content and then also hear the comments, questions that were written down in the chat. So I want everybody to be able to participate, whether you're coming in live or if you're watching or listening after the fact. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's jump into tonight's topic, which, as I teased in the intro episode, is the breakdown of discourse. So first, let's kind of set the stage for this topic, why I picked it, why it's important, and the big picture of what we're going to be discussing tonight. So what does the breakdown of discourse mean? Well, I think it's fairly apparent, fairly self-evident, but essentially what I'm saying here is that the public discourse, the public communication, public conversations that occur over a wide variety of issues, whether it be politics, religion, relational issues, anything, there has been a slow and steady breakdown of this occurring, I would say, over the years as technology has risen to become more and more prominent in our lives. We have seen a change in the way that we communicate with each other. Now, if I made this whole episode be about the idea that what people say over the internet is, they wouldn't say it in person, all that, we already kind of know that. That's been true for a very long time. We've seen people say things, even back to the text message days. People, you would, and I'm sure we're all guilty of this. We'd send someone a text message that would say things that we wouldn't actually say to the person in real life if we were face to face with them, or maybe even if we were over the phone, we wouldn't say them. Now, as the internet has become more prominent, we have access to so many different methods of communicating via just text on a screen, without our identity being known, or very little of our identity being known, without any instant feedback, without accountability. Nobody is going through and scrubbing our comments. So that the avenues for us to be able to have that kind of communication have increased dramatically over time. Think of Facebook, Twitter, any social media platform, comments in blogs, news sites, podcasts, radio shows, callers to shows. People have the ability to just communicate with people that they don't know in a way that we've never seen before in human history. So that's kind of the backdrop of how we got to where we are. And I think that one of the things that's happened is that our communication has changed fundamentally, and I would say that it's changed for the worse in a lot of ways. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't benefits to having the internet, to having text messages, to having ways to communicate with people across the country or the world, or even with friends and family instantaneously and in a variety of different ways. There are benefits to that. And I'm not going to spend too much time tonight talking about the benefits to that. I'd rather talk about the issues that we're facing, because the issues require change. The things that are good about those platforms don't require change. They just require us to keep using them. So that's not a very interesting discussion to have, or at least not in this format. So that's kind of the backdrop. And what I've noticed is that, sure, it's true that we would say things over the internet that we wouldn't say to someone in real life, that we wouldn't say in person. But there seems to be now another layer to this problem that I've noticed. And that is that it's not just that people say mean or hurtful things. It's that they say thoughtless things. They say ignorant things. They say things without any basis all the time. So we've now gotten to a point where people say things that are just unfiltered at every level. Every level. Again, I'll reiterate that not everyone participates in this. Not everyone is equally to blame for this. Not everyone approaches social media or internet communication in the same way that other people do. There's still people that desire calm, gracious, loving communication with the desire to understand, to seek truth, which are all the things that this show is trying to do. That is one of the goals, one of the philosophies, one of the hopes for this show is to increase the amount of that kind of good communication that happens in this world. So if I have even two people in the chat tonight that talk with each other about a topic in a respectful way, that desires to know the other's viewpoint, to seek truth, to find evidence, to reach rational conclusions, then I call that a victory. That is a win for this show. And as a follower of Christ, it's even more important for me personally to see objective reality point back to my Lord and Savior. That's ultimately what is most important to me. For those of you that are not religious or not Christians, I believe that we can still find common ground in the idea that truth can be found, truth can be discussed, and we can do a better job of revolving our communication, our policy making, our relationships around truth, rather than all the other not so good things that have come out of the various different ways that we are now allowed to freely communicate with others. So the problem statement for tonight's episode is fragmented discourse. I don't know if every episode going forward is going to have a problem statement. This is just kind of how I'm formatting tonight's episode, but we'll see. I think different topics will maybe have a different format. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for tonight, our problem statement is fragmented discourse. And I don't think I'm going to have to spend a lot of time arguing that this is in fact a problem. I think any of you listening and most people especially in the United States, but even a lot of people around the world that have access to, that have readily available internet access like we do, would agree that there's something wrong with the way that we talk to each other online. So let's just use that as a starting point and springboard that into the rest of our discussion tonight. So I wanted to show some examples of this from my Twitter feed. And I was looking throughout the day to try to come up with some screenshots for tonight's episode. And I just found that there's just a shocking amount of really disrespectful, bad language, not very edifying ways in which two humans are interacting with each other. So I don't want to glorify that by putting that on the screen. But suffice it to say that I'm pretty confident that all of us can think of pretty readily examples of two people, whether we're one of those two people or not, communicating in a way that is just wrong. It's just broken. It's just not the way that it's supposed to be. Showing no respect, no desire for truth, lacking critical thinking, either speaking emotionally or having no regard for the other person's character or what they believe. It's all gone. It's all out the window. So, what is the impact of this problem? This fragmented discourse that we see all the time? Well, there's 5 impacts that I want to discuss tonight. And there are more than just 5, but we're going to discuss 5, and you'll see them on the screen now. The first impact, in my view, of this fragmented discourse, which, by the way, I'll clarify that I'm not just talking about online, although I think my focus tonight is mostly going to be about social media, but this can also be a problem with people in person, too. We've seen this from footage of people at riots or protests yelling at each other, which is not a new thing, right? Protests have been around for a long time. Riots have been around for a long time. People yelling at each other on the street has been around for a long time. But I think that this just exasperates the problem on the internet, exasperates those issues as well. I think they feed into each other in a way that makes them both compound into being worse. So let's take a look at the first impact, which is loss of active listening skills. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with active listening, I don't want to treat you like you're 3. I'm pretty sure most of you will know what that means, but just a quick, let's brush up on it real quick in case you don't. Active listening is the act of listening to what someone is saying with the intention of understanding them and following up with questions to be able to learn more about where they're coming from. That is something that I see so rarely online. Facebook, Twitter. I would say that Twitter's the worst. Facebook is not as bad, although I do see a lot of this on Facebook. And it's kind of bad, but for different reasons. Twitter, you're mainly communicating with strangers. Facebook, you're mainly communicating with people you know. So it's almost worse that you're treating the people you know that way. But at the same time, people tend to be a little bit less extreme in that sense than they do on Twitter. That's no excuse for the people on Facebook that don't treat each other well. I think Twitter is worse. So I just see very little of people that are actively trying to listen. And I think one of the issues is that our active listening skills have just eroded because we're not in person, because we're not forced to engage with this person face to face. There's no accountability for what we're saying. We don't have to listen actively. We don't have to actually try to understand what the person is saying. We can just shoot out our talking points. We can just say what we think and just stampede the other person. So I think that's loss number one, or impact number one, is loss of active listening skills. The second impact to the fragmented discourse is loss of trust. And I think the biggest area where we see this come into play is mainstream media. Now, before I jump into this, and I know some of the things we're going to talk about tonight and in the future are going to be hot button things and can very easily turn political. I'm not here to advance a political position. When I talk about mainstream media, don't think I'm just talking about one particular news organization. I'm talking about all of mainstream media. So think of big companies like Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, ABC, all of that. I'm lumping under one umbrella here. I think that because of this slow erosion in our communication, we've lost trust for each other. And when you lose trust, there's a tendency to start treating people with an increased amount of disrespect. And if there's no accountability, the disrespect for a stranger, someone that you don't know at all, can run rampant. And those in mainstream media that communicate with us every day via their TV channels, their TV shows, their articles online, whatever it is, I think there has been just a loss of trust in people in general, but also in mainstream media. We just don't listen to what the media says anymore. Now, I won't pretend for 1 second that mainstream media always tells us the truth, or that mainstream media is always worth listening to now or in the past. But I think, or that there's some sort of utopian society in which mainstream media is listened to all the time that we should be striving for. I'm not trying to say any of those things. What I'm trying to say is that media was something that we used to trust more because we gave people more of the benefit of the doubt before. And now, after a variety of different things have happened, for better or for worse, we've lost that trust. So I think that's one of the impacts. A third impact is relationships that are harmed and destroyed. And if I was ranking these in terms of importance, I would put this probably at the top. Number 3, probably at the top. I've seen relationships destroyed by things people say to each other on Facebook. People that know each other. People that go to the same church. People that go to the same school. Even family members feuding on Facebook over hyper politicized things or, hyper religious topics, whatever it is. I've seen people say things that they would never say to someone in person. And not only that, but place a huge amount of emphasis on topics that are way less important than the relationship with that person. So for this one especially, I'm not going to be giving any specific examples because I'm not going to give out anybody's private information or make a bad situation worse. We don't need examples because I'm pretty sure all of us that have Facebook accounts have seen things like this. I know families that were just ravaged by disagreement over how to handle COVID. Families that have been destroyed by who they voted for president. I mean, there's and the thing is, I want to emphasize that voting for president is an important thing. Handling COVID is an important thing to get right. It's when we pretend that we know what's right all the time and that the other person doesn't, and therefore they need to be silenced or they need to be criticized or they need to be changed. That's when we start dehumanizing other people. That's when we start harming relationships, even destroying relationships that we've had for sometimes for our whole lives. So again, I think when it comes down to it, number 3 is probably the most important. I didn't rank these 5 impacts in terms of, ranking in terms of importance. This was the numbering was arbitrary. Number 4 is people or people groups are stigmatized. People or people groups become stigmatized. What do I mean by that? People groups that, and by people groups, I'm really referring to people that believe a similar thing, people that are of a certain viewpoint. Not necessarily like racial groups or age groups or anything like it, more viewpoint discrimination. People groups that believe a certain thing that maybe society, in air quotes, has deemed as false, or society has stigmatized. We have so easily found ways to dehumanize people, to stigmatize people for what they believe. We've seen this firsthand with COVID the last couple years, with politics the last couple years. I mean, just think, if you just take Trump, Biden, and COVID all together and look at the last 6 years in our country, how, and all the conversations that we've had with people about those topics, whatever you believe, we corner people. We reduce people to a single belief that they have about something. So someone might believe that, I don't know, that we should have a wall on our border. And I'm not here to say whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not offering a value judgment on that tonight. But what we do is, with this breakdown, again, this is a progressive breakdown. It's something that happens over time. We lose these skills. These impacts all affect each other. People that believe that we should put a wall on the border, someone else hears that, and they just immediately assume that that person believes A through Z other things. And now they've been put into a box, and they take that box and they dump it into the ocean. They've been labeled. They've been stigmatized. So the very last impact that I want to discuss tonight, and again, this is not an exhaustive list. The very last impact of fragmented discourse is moral confusion. What do I mean by moral confusion? I don't mean that morality itself, objective truth, has changed, or that it's become harder to understand per se, but that people talk past each other and are unable to find common ground because they're so stuck to whatever it is that they are presenting themselves, whatever aura it is that they're presenting online. So, for example, say on Twitter, we're having a discussion about a really hot button issue like abortion or same-sex marriage or something like that, like really hot button cultural issues, really hot button moral issues. When we do all the 4 things that are on this list already, loss of active listening skills, loss of trust, harming relationships, stigmatizing people and people groups. It's not about finding the truth anymore. It's not about doing the right thing. It's not about finding what the right thing is, doing the work of moral epistemology, let alone accepting moral ontology, which of course some of us do. They're not even doing any of that. There's just confusion. You can have a discussion. I can be reading through a Twitter thread where 150 people commented, and it's about some policy thing that it has to do with a very deep issue like abortion. And you can walk away from that feed independent of what preconceived notions I have, whatever I already believe. Just if I'm looking at the thread itself, I can walk away from that having no idea how to arrive at any real evidence or truth or what is the right thing to do. The discussion happening doesn't drive towards that. It drives towards one-upsmanship, throwing out buzz phrases, trying to dunk on people. That's my favorite new phrase from the last, I don't know, I think it popped up in the last year, a couple years in social media when people dunk on each other, which is just a way of just trying to, you're just trying to one-up someone else. Nobody's actually searching for what's right. So we see all these impacts, and I want to switch gears a little bit to a little bit more of a positive thing, which is what do we do about this? And as you can tell, this is going to be a multi-part episode. There's no way that we're going to be able to do this topic justice in just one episode, and that's fine. I already talked about that in the intro, that there's going to be topics that require sometimes 3 to 5 episodes. This one might be one of those. Let's talk positively for a moment. Why is having, on the flip side of the impacts of the problem of fragmented discourse, why is having rational discussion and debate important? So you'll see on the screen now that I have 3 reasons. There's more than that, of course. But I think these are 3 fairly prominent reasons. The first reason why rational discussion and debate are important is that it places an emphasis on truth finding. It's not about the other person's emotions or feelings or necessarily the current situation. It is able to put aside distracting factors and focus on the truth of the matter. The second reason why rational discussion and debate are important is respect for others. Now, you may not respect what someone else believes. Like, I don't respect the belief of a murderer that they should murder people. I can respect a person, meaning not that I respect their intellect or that I respect what they've done, but in the words, in the way that I carry myself, in the discourse. Remember, we're talking about discourse. I can offer the other person my desire to seek truth, to have grace, to have understanding. That's how I show respect for someone else. Raising the bar, in other words. The third and final thing is that it switches gears. Having rational discussion about something, it switches the gears from being about fiat or who is louder or who can make the laws to persuasion. Let's find the evidence. Let's use it to discover what's true, what's right, and then persuade other people with that evidence. Silencing people. This whole thing in our culture about, cancel culture. We hear that all the time. Some people believe that it's a bigger deal than other people. And again, I'm not here to offer a value judgment on that per se. But we do know that people are silenced. And by silence, sometimes it's just whoever talks louder. We switch gears away from that into persuasion. We say, here's the evidence. Here are facts. Here's an argument. Here's reasons to believe something. And then we open our minds to hearing how the other person may have a counter argument to that, or may have a different thought to that. Trust me, for any of you that have had conversations like that with people, and I'm not talking about, when I say debate, I'm not talking about a formal debate. It can be as simple and casual as just offering a reason for something and then backing it up with a claim that is based on some kind of fact or evidence. We do it all the time casually. We don't necessarily call it a debate, but we do it all the time naturally. And we need to do it more. We need to do it a lot more. And especially in the places where there's no accountability, especially in the places where people can just get crushed by other people. This is a real call to raise the bar, to increase the respect that we offer others, and to focus on persuasion rather than fiat. So what are some of the obstacles? We're going to end tonight, before we get to the comments and questions, if there are any. We're going to end with obstacles to having rational discussion and debate. So I'll leave the importance points up on the screen and we'll go down to the obstacles. I think there's 4 very significant obstacles. Again, not an exhaustive list. But obstacle number 1 to having rational discussion is emotion. When emotion plays a prime role in our discussion with others, it's oftentimes not a discussion. It's yelling. It's saying things that have nothing to do with the actual topic. It's bringing in personal issues and things that just distract from actually trying to find the truth and look at the facts. Now, I'll quickly say, for those of us that are a little bit more emotional communicators than others, and I understand that that's totally a thing, for those of us that are more emotional communicators, I'm not trying to say that emotion intrinsically is bad in a discussion. Emotion can be an important check on certain things. It can keep us from being too cold or too calculating or too judgmental. But it should never be the driver in a policy-making discussion or a moral discussion or a truth-finding discussion. Right? When we're weighing evidence, sure, there's a role for the human heart to play in that. But emotion should never be front and center when you're trying to have the sorts of discussions that we're talking about tonight. The second obstacle is of having rational discussion and debate is truncated communication methods. I sincerely believe that we have lost our edge. We have allowed the character limit on Twitter and the little blurbs on Facebook and posting little short things about our lives on social media. We've rewired our brains to think about how to communicate in such a limited space. And it's harmed our ability to think expansively, to think of arguments for something, to think of reasons for something, to actually be able to listen to someone else's reasons for something. think of how often you've seen in the news, on social media, think of how often you've seen the same talking points just reiterated over and over and over again. I'm talking from all sides of the aisle here. The same talking points just reiterated over again. That's what I'm talking about. It's like sometimes we become drones in the way that we communicate. And it's not even, I wouldn't even say that it rises to the bar of being called communication. It's just nothing. It's worthless. It's really worthless. It doesn't mean anything. It's just words coming out of someone's mouth, or words coming out of someone's fingers, I should say, that ultimately does nothing to further persuading other people of the truth. It does nothing to build relationships. It does nothing to fact find. It does none of those good things, those virtuous things. So the third obstacle, I think, to having this kind of higher level discourse is unchecked biases. It is so hard for us when we communicate with other people that we disagree with to leave our biases at the door. And it's always going to be impossible to leave them completely at the door, but oftentimes we knock the door down with all of our baggage in hand to go argue with someone. I think we can do a much better job at assessing why we believe what we believe and just saying, look, I might have an emotional reason for thinking this, or something in my past has biased me a certain way, and it's affecting my ability to see or to judge soundly in this case. Just recognize that. I can do a better job at it. You can do a better job at it. And continuing to allow unchecked biases through the door will always be a hindrance to raising the bar of our discourse. The fourth and final obstacle we're going to talk about tonight is lack of information. A lot of times, and I love to point back to Twitter threads because they're like a cesspool of examples for this. People will just say things out of thin air. They'll make things up in an attempt to sort of try to kind of respond to what someone else is saying, but oftentimes it doesn't really have that much to do with what they're saying. And it's certainly not a rejoinder to what they're saying. It's certainly not an argument. I think people can increase their level of education on something. They can learn more about something. And look, I understand that when we're talking about policy, for example, I mean, I'm not a policy expert. I won't pretend to know the best policy for a wide swath of different things that people in government deal with. If I researched it thoroughly, I may be able to offer some good thoughts and present evidence and make an argument on things. I mean, I did in high school, I did that in speech and debate. That was our thing. For an entire year, we had a specific topic, and then we would research it, come up with a case to solve a problem, and we would argue with other people about it. But it took research and finding evidence and learning about the problem and thinking logically. And like, if we don't have the research done, it's just, we're better silent. We're better off just being silent about it. If you find yourself super passionate about something, but when the time comes, unable to really speak about it, that generally means that you are lacking in knowledge about it, and you have some sort of bias that's driving you to be emotional and involved in that situation. So check both of those things, go research a little bit, and then assess your biases. And I promise you, if you come back to that conversation, you will be so much more equipped to be able to talk about it. But I think you'll also just be a way more effective communicator and enjoy talking to someone else more, because you'll have left the emotional baggage at the door and you'll be able to just get something done to be productive and to be fruitful and edifying. with the other person. So that is going to be a wrap for our discussion period. And it looks like our comment section's blank tonight. So no comments to talk about, no questions for tonight. So that's okay. Looking forward to people's thoughts in the future. Again, this is a new part of my YouTube channel. So, there might be some episodes here where there's no comments, and that's totally fine. But I intend to leave some space at the end of each of the episodes to discuss. And if you are listening after the fact, please don't hesitate to comment just because you weren't here for the live recording. Come to the chat in YouTube, comment, leave comments, discuss, and I will do my best to try to respond to them. So that's going to wrap it up for our discussion on the breakdown of Discourse. Please leave your thoughts and feedback, not just thoughts on the core of the discussion, but also feedback for the show. How's the audio, the video, that kind of stuff. I'm trying to make improvements. This is the young show, and I want to learn how to make it better for you guys. So I will listen and take to heart any feedback that you have. Leave it in the comments below. A special thank you to the folks who were able to join us live tonight. And if you missed the live discussion, you can always watch or listen after the fact here on YouTube, Anchor FM, or Spotify. And drop a like and tell a friend if you enjoyed the content tonight. Thanks again, and until next time, God bless.